Hi guys, welcome back. In today's video, I would like to discuss the crucial first step for someone who has been laid off, aiming to turn the tables on a setback and emerge even stronger after the layoff. That first step, in my opinion, is surrendering and embracing. Now, by surrender, I'm not saying you should give up on your situation, far from it. What I mean is surrendering to a few key realities that you cannot change and embracing them to your advantage. And there are 5 things, in my opinion, that you should surrender and embrace if you want to come back from your layoff even stronger. So the first thing you should surrender to is you should surrender to and embrace capitalism. Capitalism is a system and you can leverage it to your benefit. The second thing that you should surrender and accept is you should surrender and accept and integrate outsourcing into your job searching strategy. If you cannot combat outsourcing, align with it. The third thing that you should come to terms with is AI. If you cannot oppose AI, leverage its capabilities. The fourth thing that you should acknowledge is the reality of human nature. If you cannot alter unfairness, exploit your competitive advantage. The fifth and last point is to recognize the nature of government. If you cannot reform it, consider voting with your feet. We'll go ahead and explore each of these points in this video. The first point I would like to touch is you should surrender to and embrace capitalism. It is a system and you can leverage it to your benefit. Mass layoffs, I believe, as I said in my previous video, will be an annual sport event from now on. Mass layoffs and more importantly, PIP or performance-based layoffs, will be an annual event from now on. Companies will be changing up expectations, increasing their PIP quota, to make sure that they can get rid of a certain amount of people every year to maximize shareholders' value as well as the company's profits. Companies starting from 2024 will hire just to fire. They hire to show that they are growing and fire to show that they are trying to optimize for the bottom line. And I will show you a couple of examples. I have this article here from this blogger. He said he was part of Amazon's 10% PIP. If you don't know, Amazon has always had a PIP quota of around 10%. So every year they get rid of the bottom 10% of their employees. And yeah, it is a stock ranking system. And essentially, I'm not going to read the entire article here, but Amazon get rid of 10% of employees every year to optimize for their shareholders' value. Here it's on Team Blind, but I also confirmed this with many of my in-network connections that Meta now has a 15% or 20% PIP quota, right, inside Meta. And I think Amazon is also similar, so I have around like 15 to 20% PIP quota. People who actually got into these companies are some of the best software engineers and engineers around the world. Just because they belong to this quota does not mean that they are bad in any measurement. But essentially, the companies just have to optimize bottom line profits, right? So they will be doing PIP-based or performance improvement plan-based layoffs to avoid on severance costs. So this will be an annual event from now on, 2024, and I think the number will keep increasing. As I said in one of my previous videos, the problem with the tech stock market is that we printed so much money, and big tech has been really corrupted. So yeah, their growth will be really slowing starting from 2024 due to all the money printing and all the problems like aging population, etc. So it will lead to an annual mass layoff of 10, 15, 20% of each of these companies. They will call that natural attrition. And I would say that this is something neither good nor bad. It is part of late-stage capitalism. I personally like capitalism a lot. It is my favorite system to live in. Despite the fact that I was also negatively affected by layoffs, I think it is still the fairest system possible compared to other type of economic system, such as fascism or socialism or communism. And even if you don't like capitalism, then what can you do, right? I mean, many people, after they got laid off, they became really resentful of capitalism. But you got to understand, like beside the West, there are 7 billion people on Earth living under capitalism and late-stage capitalism in Japan, South Korea, in many other places. Nobody here in the US can force the other 7 billion people in the world to live a certain way and tell them what system to live in. It is impossible. You cannot change nor kill capitalism. Even monarchies still exist in this world after millennia. The other 7 billion people in the world changed the West, just as much, if not more, than the West changed them. Every country has their own Hunter Biden laptop story. No country is perfect. In my opinion, capitalism will never die, regardless of whether or not you like it. Especially if you just got laid off and have like 2 days of canned foods left in your pantry, with 20 maxed out credit cards, a mortgage and a car loan along student loans on your shoulders. You cannot really talk about forcing or changing the system or protesting or telling the other 7 billion people in the world how to live when you yourself are struggling. And thus, I believe that the first step for you to get over layoff really fast is to surrender to and embrace capitalism. Both its goods, bads, and its uglies, along with corruption. You should take care of yourself first. Put yourself first. You cannot fight a system backed up by 7 billion people on this planet with 2 days of supplies of canned potatoes left in your pantry. You may or may not like capitalism or late-stage capitalism. That's your choice, and I won't argue with your choices here. We are all free people. If you think you're better off under some forms of social capitalism like Sweden or Norway, then great. I think you should vote by your feet and move there. And I totally support your freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of location, as well as your human right to vote by your feet. But I have to warn you though, the world is not fair, and no country or system is perfect. Sweden or Norway or Finland, they have their own problems too. I would strongly encourage you to actually travel and live in these countries for at least 2 weeks, preferably 1 month, before making the decision to move. So essentially, if you don't want to be affected by capitalism, you don't want to ever get laid off, you don't want to ever get unemployed, I would say the only choice would be go to North Korea. To be honest, because North Korea is the only place where if you get unemployed or laid off, you actually go straight to a concentration camp. You go straight to a gulag. Like the thing about capitalism is, yes, you can get laid off, you can get unemployed. But the thing is, capitalism allows you to come back from your layoff. So if you are laid off, you can actually later get a job, even a better paying job or a job that maybe pay the same. And you can get back to your feet. Lots of people really like socialism. Outside, if you go to North Korea, you got laid off, you go straight to a concentration camp and gulag. That's the only way you get food. And you can never get unemployed, okay? But then you will stay there forever, okay? If that's a system that you like, I encourage you to vote by your feet. For me personally, despite being negatively affected by the late-stage capitalism, mass layoffs in the United States, I still think capitalism is a fair system to lift the vast majority of us, humanity, out of poverty. It has certainly lifted me and my wife and our relatives out of poverty in the third world countries and the United States as well. Even if it is not perfect, as I said before, 7 billion people in the world are actively living under the system. And I cannot just tell 7 billion people around the world how to live. What if these 7 billion people are totally fine with the current stage of capitalism? So I believe the first step in overcoming your layoff fast is to stop going to protests and trying to make the world fair. You should just cope with capitalism if you don't like it, or move elsewhere with other systems if you want. I'm totally fine with capitalism myself, despite all the challenges I've been through. I don't blame it. I would never be here today with you guys without the globalized, free market economy driven system. So essentially, resenting capitalism, hating your employers for doing what the capitalistic market requires them to do, or resenting the government for being corrupted, will not help you to get out of your own layoff or the rat race. Instead of doing that, let's find a solution to your layoff problems. There is a quote that I really like from Bruce Lee: "Be like water." Let's use capitalism to your advantage to get out of your layoff situation, instead of blaming it or blaming capitalism. I definitely used and took advantage of the capitalist system myself to get out of my own layoff, and you definitely can too. That is the entire point of this Beat Layoff to its knees video series. I would like to give the laid off folks all the tricks, tips, and systems that I used to beat my own layoff. And everything started here with a mindset, okay? So let's delve deeper into what you can do to surrender or embrace capitalism. If you know you are going to be laid off, or your company is going to do either mass layoff or PIP-based layoffs really soon, most of the time, I think you should just surrender. What I mean when I say surrender is not to surrender your layoff, but you should not try to prove yourself by working harder during the notice period, or argue with your boss, or gossip around the workplace, or share with your friends or relatives about how unfair your layoff is. It is a waste of time. Also, this is not legal advice, okay? But unless you already consulted with your lawyers and gather enough evidences, like 100% sure that you were actually wrongfully terminated based on protected class statuses, don't waste time protesting or suing your employers. For this, you should talk to your lawyers. This is not legal advice again, but most of the time, way before, like months before the layoffs, usually your employers already had their legal teams together and calculated everything, legal-wise and financial-wise. So don't worry about proving yourself here. Everything had been carefully arranged most of the time. Mass layoffs are in fact never random. They are made in a calculated way to ensure that you as an employee cannot legally do anything about it. Again, this is not legal advice. Personally, I was laid off despite the fact that at the time, I and my manager were preparing for my promotion packet. I received great performance ratings for the 4 consecutive performance review periods before that. Later on, I finally found out the real reason for my layoff. I was one of the highest performers on my team for that level, and that I was also paid higher than my other colleagues at the same role level. I was paid higher thanks to pre-negotiations with the company on compensation packages before I got into the company. Essentially, I got 4 offers from other companies and cross-negotiated between them. This was before the pandemic. But the thing was, my team did not work on the core product for the company, and thus I was too costly for them to keep. Essentially, I was a very high-paid employee compared to other people on the same level, and I essentially worked on internal products that made no money for the company. After getting the layoff news, I actually talked to a couple of lawyers to find evidences of wrongful termination. But guess what? Due to it being a mass layoff, the vast majority of lawyers told me that nothing could be done about it, and that the employer seemed to have their asses covered legally. After hours and days of wasting time and money to talk to lawyers, I just decided to stop and instead focus on my next step, finding the next 9-to-5 gig, putting in more hours into my side business and side contract work than my 9-to-5 going forward. Don't waste time protesting or suing unless you are sure you were wrongfully terminated. For this, you should talk to your lawyers. However, once your employer picks you for mass layoff, they likely got their legal assets legally covered. And just think about it. Why wasting time winning back an employer that wanted to let you go in the first place, despite your performance? If they have no interest in investing in you further as an employee, then why even bother? You are fighting them because of your own ego and insecurities. You need to stop buying into the "we are a family" bullshit that these companies are selling to extract the most out of your slavery labor. In short, I would like to say that you should avoid the scarcity mindset and embrace abundance mindset. If you find out that you are going to be laid off, stop giving a shit about it and get out there and find another place. You go to a job, a job, a just over broke to get by. It is not something that will likely get you to the American dream. If you cannot change the situation with your mouth and hands, you can change that with your feet. You should go to where you are treated best. By the way, while we are at it, I would like to address another type of layoff that has been very rampant recently. PIP-based layoff. PIP stands for Performance Improvement Plan. But I heard this from someone else. A PIP should actually stand for Paid Interview Period, not Performance Improvement Plan. It is just a cost-cutting measurement and a way for C-suite or management to shift blames of bad financial performance to their employees, no more no less. And that's just the way capitalism works, right? I say this not because, I want the world is fair or I'm blaming capitalism here. That's the way it is, right? We just talk about this so that you come to terms with it. I believe that PIP layoff will be rampant in 2024 as companies look to cut costs due to high interest rate and high inflation environment that we're in. So my word of advice here essentially is don't try to prove yourself if you are going to be laid off. Surrender to capitalism and embrace capitalism. Use it to your advantage. Use your layoffs or your PIP as paid interview period. Don't stress over it. Don't blame yourself over it. Just keep going. They are all part of capitalism. And there are 7 billion people in the world living fine under this system. Okay, you cannot really change it. You have the right to slack off from work, to interview elsewhere, or to end your employment and move to some other companies yourself. That is also capitalism. That's the way you would use to actually take advantage of capitalism for your own benefit. So capitalism runs both ways. The employment is at will. Both employers and employees, and you as the employees, should be exploiting capitalism just as much as your employers do. Always be prepared to interview elsewhere to get the best job just over broke for yourself. Or do side contract work along with your 9 to 5, or start your own businesses alongside 9 to 5. You should forget loyalty to your employers because loyalty is not part of capitalism. They will fire you in a heartbeat when they run out of cash, and you should fire them in a heartbeat too, once you find a better deal than what they have to offer. It is all a fair game. Okay, so the second advice I would like to give is you should accept and integrate outsourcing into your job searching strategy. If you cannot combat outsourcing, align with outsourcing. Due to outsourcing, 9 to 5 employees' salaries in the US has been stagnant with respect to inflation in their living areas. This includes software engineering too. So even though software engineering salaries in high cost of living areas have been going up, it really could not keep up with the inflation in these areas. So usually when people talk about software engineering salaries, they compare with the average inflation in the entire United States, and they say, oh, software engineering salaries are going up more than the average inflation in the United States. But the fact is, it is actually going up slower than the inflation in housing prices in the respective area where the salary data was actually collected. You can probably see this from your in-network friends, or you can see this online. I mean, most people in the Bay Area or Seattle, they actually have to rent to live. It used to be the fact that if you work as a factory worker or you work for tech companies, you can actually buy a house, get a 15 or 30 years loan to get a house in the Bay Area or Seattle. But nowadays, most people working in these areas, they mostly rent for life. They cannot actually use their salary to get a house in these areas. So essentially, software engineering salaries in higher cost living areas have not been able to keep up with inflation in housing prices. Okay, so outsourcing did not totally destroy all jobs in the US. In fact, many jobs probably have been created, but the pay has been extremely behind inflation in most areas. Thus, outsourcing did not make US job market dead. It just makes US job market dead end. And also, when talking about software engineering salary, I would like to also mention Section 174 that recently went into effect, right? Section 174 essentially says that, companies cannot deduct the cost of hiring software engineers as like one-time cost immediately at the year that they hire the engineers, but they have to actually deduct that cost as expenses over a 5 years period. So let's say if you hire a $200,000 a year software engineer, it used to be the fact that they can subtract the entire $200,000 as expense in that year. But with Section 174, essentially they have to amortize. They can only subtract, $40,000 a year over a period of 5 years. So essentially that would result in, as you can see here, I'll show you an article here. It's on pragmaticengineer.com, right? And you can see here, this first column right here is before Section 174. So essentially, it's a software engineering labor cost paid during the year, $1 million, of which deductible for the financial year. So you can deduct like $1 million. So as you can see here, if the cost of software engineering labor is like $1 million, like with the Section 174 changes, you can only deduct a certain amount from the total taxable income of your company. So essentially, this chart right here, it really clearly shows that, with the introduction of Section 174, along with outsourcing and, AI modernization, all these factors will greatly increase the rates of outsourcing to third world countries and also outsourcing to AI, right? I believe that this trend is irreversible, right? Businesses will try to maximize shareholders' value by whichever way they can, including, colluding with US governments to bend regulations in their favor. The thing about this is, the outsourced workers are not to blame. They are part of the global market-driven economy. They are part of the capitalist society, right? They are not to blame. The outsourced workers should not be blamed. I mean, if you look at it, outsourcing is deflationary. Outsourcing makes goods cheaper and more abundant. Businesses, by default, would outsource to cheaper places to compete with one another. That's their job in the capitalist market, right? Their job is to compete and bring the best value to the customers. And so, the customers here include you. So, I mean, we just have to accept it. That's just the way capitalism works. The government also plays a role in accelerating this trend by printing money like crazy during the pandemic, which makes made in America companies have to resort to outsourcing. Even with companies that traditionally have prioritized made in America, with all the inflation that's going on right now, which is nowadays are ruled by the global elites, is a really good move, I would say. Like I said in previous video, you can consider moving to a third world country. They call it third world, but infrastructure has been rapidly developed in these countries, and in many regards, these countries have more freedom than first world countries. And you can work remotely for 2 or 3 Western companies at the same time, as contract workers. And with these Western companies are trying really hard to outsource to these third world countries through remote contract works. Most of these third world countries have very strict laws that prevent foreign companies from monitoring work hours on laptops in their countries. That is actually considered espionage if employers in the US try to monitor employees' laptops in foreign countries. This is like what I heard from my friends. So if you move to a third world country like Indonesia or Vietnam or Philippines, it is actually illegal for American employers to actually monitor your mouse clicks and your computers remotely from the US. Right? They cannot install essentially workplace spyware on your laptop and monitor you like the way they would do it to their US-based employees, right? I mean, that's why in many cases, that I know, this is not legal advice again, but you should consult with your lawyers, especially expat lawyers. But in many countries, it is actually the employees in many third world countries that work as contract workers for American companies. They have way more freedom than US employees in that regard. They are rarely monitored on their computers or laptops. That would be considered espionage. So if you are a foreign company and you install spyware on your employees' laptops in, let's say, another country, that country may consider this American company as espionage. That's actually illegal in many places by law, right? But in the United States, if you're an American working for American companies inside the United States, you are under the U.S. jurisdiction, and the United States really protect private enterprises. They allow like private enterprises to do whatever they want with work equipment, right? I believe this from what my friends told me. Like they will have to establish like a branch or like an office in that country, which most U.S. companies wouldn't because they don't want to have to pay taxes, like double taxations. So they would just like hire remote employees as a foreign entity, and as a foreign entity, if you don't have a base in certain countries, then you are not actually allowed to monitor that country's employees' laptops. Also, as expats, you would have favorable tax advantage. Like some countries like Singapore or Vietnam actually charge a flat tax rate to expat employees. Many citizens in these countries have to actually pay incremental tax brackets, the same as employees of American companies that live in the United States. But as expats, right, you would have to only pay a flat tax rate. And I know that flat tax rate is something that many Americans are really into, right? And so I would say that you actually would have more freedom in these third world countries because they actually fall into another jurisdictions. And as long as the US companies you're working for don't have an office or a branch offices through which they employ you through these third world countries, then you would actually have more freedom, more flexibility, more work-life balance. You won't be managed through spyware installed on your laptop the way that you would be if you work in the United States for your American companies. I would say that you should move where you are treated best, and you can move to many of the third world countries, and maybe you can move to South Korea even, and you won't be tied down to your employer for health insurance. So that's one of the biggest pros I can say about these. I would say that most people think about freedom as freedom of speech or the ability to vote for politicians. But how about freedom of location? If you cannot vote by your feet and can only vote by your hands, is that freedom? I mean, most Americans living in the US nowadays are descendants of people living in Europe on their feet or boats, maybe excluding the slave or maybe excluding Native Americans, right? And that I think is freedom. If you are not Native Americans and you are not descendants of slaves and your ancestors come from Europe, right, they essentially voted by their feet. They had the ultimate freedom. They did not cling to Europe. They moved to an unknown place at the time called America. Don't cling to the US, cling to freedom like your European, Asian, Middle Eastern, African ancestors. I always vote with my feet, and voting by feet is the ultimate freedom. It is what separates people living in the West from people living in North Korea. Most people move from California to Texas, or they move from California to Florida, and they stop there. Why you stop there? You already sold your cars, you already sold your houses, you already said goodbye to your relatives and friends in your home state, and probably only see them once or twice per year. Why not go a step further and just fly somewhere else? I and my wife recently went to Southeast Asia, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, to search for our next home because, as I mentioned in a previous video, we are actively planning to move out of the US. It was great. These countries have come a long way since we last visited them 5 or 10 years ago. The third thing that I think you should surrender and embrace is AI. You should come to terms with AI. I call AI Outsourcing 2.0. If you cannot beat AI, leverage its capabilities. Essentially, I would like to say that we usually talk about AI as Terminator, but in the past couple of months, I have observed one thing, that resumes and LinkedIn have been messed up badly due to AI. So the battle for applying for jobs and getting job offers have been heavily skewed. I mean, seriously, this is the first negative effect that AI has on the job market. Resume writings and jobs applying are now all done by AI. All applicants have the best resume with the most eye-catching keywords, matching all the jobs requirements to the teeth. I would say that this is the most significant way that AI is negatively affecting the job market across the board right now. I mean, this includes the software engineering job market. Once a role is open, there are thousands of AI-generated and AI-applied job applications. All of them are sort of the same, in terms of keyword matching degrees compared to the original job posting. AI is outsourcing 2.0, as I said before, and essentially outsourcing on steroids. AI will greatly bridge the gap between foreign workers and Western workers. It will close the gap in communication greatly. And also it will close the gap in education. If you work in the software industry, you understand that the most popular programming language is English, right? So JavaScript will never be as popular as English, maybe Chinese, as a programming language. AI will greatly and vastly improve foreign workers' ability to communicate with their Western counterparts, especially remotely. AI will also become the great equalizer. Essentially, it will democratize knowledge even more and better than Google search. And I think AI will democratize productivity across nation borders, cultures, and languages. And so essentially, if you cannot fight AI, utilize AIs. Use ChatGPT for your resumes, for your job application, for Gmail, etc. Because nowadays everyone is using it, right? So you cannot just be like anti-AI, like I don't want to lose my privacy, don't want to share information, etc. No, essentially everyone has to use AI nowadays. Otherwise, you'll be like left in the dust in the job market, because I would say that AI has better communication skills than a lot of human software engineers I know. Like, this is not something that I'm against engineers, but many of the engineers I know have worse communication skills than AI. Like in terms of writing skills, in terms of just regular communication skills, like AI communicates better. Essentially, I'm a senior software engineer, so I work with my manager to also review resumes submitted to our job postings. And so yeah, it's essentially we cannot avoid using AI nowadays, and I would suspect that as time goes on, humans will be more and more attached to using AI. You cannot escape it, right? Just embrace it and take advantage of its abilities. Okay, so the fourth thing I would say that we should surrender to and embrace is we should embrace the realities of human nature. We should acknowledge that humans' nature are greed, fear, and thirst for power, right? If you cannot alter unfairness, how about exploiting your competitive advantage, right? So I would say that the world is not fair, right? I say it both ways. So maybe the world is not fair to you, but the world is also not fair to people who don't have the competitive advantages that you have, right? Maybe you are born American, maybe you are born with certain talents, maybe you are born by default speaking certain languages that are very popular in the world. You don't have to learn a second or third language to be really communicate with the rest of the world, right? So the world is not fair, essentially, and it does not have to be fair, right? And because it's not fair, that is actually your advantage. many people, especially people who got laid off and people who essentially got fired, keep blaming CEOs or leaders. And yes, I understand that many CEOs are jerks and psychopaths, and many politicians are corrupted. But given us in the same situations, maybe we would act the same way, right? We are all humans, right? Maybe the CEOs or the managers that you are hating on are good people to their families, right? I mean, I personally know some VPs and SVPs in some tech companies, and they're actually good people to their families, as far as I can see, and also to our family. But essentially, the way capitalism works, they have to fire some certain percentage of people in the company, or they will have to fire everyone if the company goes bankrupt, or they will be replaced by the board of directors with someone that are willing to fire people in the company. So essentially, if CEOs are not firing people, they will be replaced by new CEOs who can actually do that, right? So I would say that all CEOs have to maximize shareholders' value in certain ways. Otherwise, you'll be fired. So as you hunt for jobs or extending your businesses or side hustles, you will likely get betrayed, ghosted, rejected, and maybe even get mistreated, right? Whatever that means. Maybe you would have to fire your own employees at some point when economy gets hard, or maybe as you get pressure from the board of directors, right? So you should never play the victim card here, right? We are all the same to a certain extent. The victim card is a chain on your necks. Health insurance and mortgages are the chains on your feet. Government's propaganda is a chain on your wrist. Everyone has their own battles. Don't take things personally. Just chill. If you don't feel like competing in the US rat race, choose something different. Choose a different battle, a different career, a different company, or a different country, even a different continent. Okay, so the fifth and the final point I would like to make in this video in terms of surrendering is I think you should recognize the nature of government. Government nature and corruption will be here to stay, right? And if you cannot reform the government with only 2 weeks left of canned foods in your pantry, with 20 maxed out credit cards and a car loan, consider voting with your feet, right? Government won't do shit to help you. Governments work for themselves and not for their people. And this is true for every single government on earth, right? Regardless of who is president, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or who is in charge here, nothing is going to change. The immigration system, especially for the high-skilled immigrants, it has not changed for 40 years, which is 10 presidential terms. All the way from, I think from George H.W. Bush or something. And I think that it will probably only go downhill. If US immigration policy is a human, she's older than me. Probably already sent her kids to college and waiting to greet her grandchildren. So almost 3 generations passed, and high-skilled immigration is still a lottery in the United States. Sometimes, as a high-skilled immigrant in the US, I and my wife felt like fools. We should have just fly to Mexico and cross the border. I mean, lots of high-skilled immigrants probably felt the same. Why wasting time on the H-1B lottery? The USCIS H-1B fee alone, not including lawyer fee and other fees, is more expensive than the flight ticket from Vietnam to Mexico. I think it is twice more expensive than the flight, just for a chance at the lottery. No free hotel rooms, no buffet breakfast, no free blankets for high-skilled immigrants coming to the United States, okay? Only lottery. There is no point in staying and or changing the West here. Just let it burn. Go where you are treated best. I'm in the let the West burn camp. The elites are letting the West burn too. Why do you and I, middle-class brokies, should bother? Whatever the elites are doing, just copy them. Easy peasy. You, essentially in this battle of layoff and capitalism competition, you are the only one who can help yourself. I, as a high-skilled immigrant, are not the victim. I never say I'm the victim of the capitalist market in the United States, right? So I'm not a victim. I vote by my brains, my hands, and my feet. I move where I'm treated best. Okay, so if you have been looking or watching the news recently, you know that, legal immigrants are leaving Canada, California, and Chicago. Right, so here I will show you an article. It say, who is leaving Canada and why. And essentially it was immigrants, right? So many of you may feel happy about this, but I will say that many of these immigrants are actually high-skilled immigrants, right? So, immigrants coming from 1982 to 2017, they are leaving Canada, right? within 20 years of their entrance. Okay, so I would say that a significant amount of these migrants are actually legal, and I would say that many of them are high-skilled immigrants, right? And here another document here, I say that, in terms of California, right? It say here, together California and New York had 465,000 immigrants move out of their states to others, right? Unlike California, though, New York had been losing immigrants to internal migration since 1970s. And like from within my network, I know that many people leaving these states to come back to their home countries and even to go to other states. And like me, for example, I moved away from California to Texas, right? So these states are actually losing immigrants, high skill and low skill alike. Also another article here, you've probably seen this last year. So migrant family journeys back to Venezuela. More leaving Chicago as winter looms. So essentially, I'm not sure if this is like high skill, low skill or whatever, but they're leaving Chicago for Venezuela. So you can imagine like the situation is not gonna get better, right? Just let it burn, right? The elites are letting it burn. So maybe we should copy the elites and also let it burn. You also need to understand that the 7 billion non-Western people in the world changes the West and the US just as much, if not more, than the US and the West changes the world. The things that are happening in the US and the West are due to other countries' interference. You cannot change all of these nations, right? Their populations together is, 7 billion people. Corruption, bribery, Hunter Biden laptop are everywhere and will never die. Going to vote or going to protest or donating to campaigns is a waste of time and money, especially if you are currently out of job. Save that money to build up your life elsewhere so you actually have enough money to lobby and bribe your way to prosperity, whatever. And your money is actually big enough to matter to these rich-ass politicians. So to sum up, for you to overcome your layoff quickly, I would say the first step you should take is surrender and embrace the following 5 things. Surrender to and embrace capitalism. Use it to your advantage. The second thing is surrender to and embrace outsourcing. If you cannot fight outsourcing, join it. The third thing is surrender to AI. If you cannot fight AI, use it. The fourth thing you should surrender and embrace is you should surrender to and embrace human's nature. Greed, fear, thirst for power. If you cannot change unfairness in the world, capitalize on your competitive advantage. The fifth thing and final thing I say, you should surrender to government nature. It will never change. And if you cannot change government, vote with your feet. The quote that I really like that sums up this video of mine is "Be like water" by Bruce Lee. I wish you the best of luck in your job search journey. I'll see you in the next episode in this series. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.